Right. So, welcome to the series of Azure DevOps. In context to the Azure DevOps one, because in the previous sessions we discussed about how to create a project in Azure DevOps environment. So once we have created a project, we have different options wherein we can create some different dashboards. At the same time, we can create multiple sprints and backlogs and all everything, especially whenever we are working on agile environment, because there are the three prominent tools we have. One is about Jira, which is agile project management tool. And the next was Rally, one of the prominent tool we use in the field of agile. The next one about Azure DevOps. This is also one of the prominent tool which is used to create even sprints and backlogs, work items, etc. At the same time, in addition to that, one more advantage under DevOps is to create some data pipelines, because when we are working for any application, irrespective of the technology as well as the domain, it's always important for us to update whatever the data pipelines creation, because data flow process is something essentially required. So when we are working on the project, if there is any kind of changes happens in between, so everything has to be addressed 100%. In this regard, it's always important for us to know about what are the different Azure data pipelines do we have, and how do we create some Azure data pipelines is what something being into DevOps one has to learn, right? So in this regard, here we can see there are different options, as I told you, right? So we can create even work items, boards, backlogs, etc. This I'm going to explain you in coming days. Okay. Next, when it comes to the repos itself is concerned, we can create multiple files at the same time, branches, etc. All that. Next, here you can see this is where generally this data pipelines can be created, right? So because here we can create test plans and artifacts and all, but here we can see there are pipelines which can be created for data. So here you can see there is an option called pipeline, wherein we can select the pipelines. At the same time, we need to create the first pipeline, especially when we are working on an option. So if you want to import any pipeline, because there are three more options. When we are going to create any kind of pipelines, we can create a folder. And if you want to import any kind of pipelines from an external sources and all, we can do that. At the same time, if you want to manage the security of the application we are creating, right? So instead of accessing from some other people and all that, so we can do some settings and all. Settings are important, right? So configuration, authentication, authorizations, creating some security rules and all, right? So this is all something part of managing security, that which I am not discussing now. I am going for creating a pipeline as from the beginning. So here you can see there is an option called create pipeline. Let's say, for example, from where the code was, that we have to be taken into consideration. For example, where we have a code from the Bitbucket, okay, or else from the GitHub or something of that sort. Normally, we can take the code, because from where the code has to be accessed and all everything, we need to access it, right? So we have to grant an access and we need to do that. If that was the case, it is always important for us when we are going to create this access of creating pipelines. Here you can see there is an option with GitHub. Okay, there is an option for GitHub, wherein we can create an option for GitHub, right? So you can go to that application, go to this pipeline, because there are two things. Because when we are creating the pipelines, you need to see either you are selecting Azure platform, then it is different. Otherwise, if you are selecting a platform from the regular these things and all, right? So that is something different, right? So here you can see Bitbucket Cloud is what something which we have taken. Now grant access is what something which we have to be performed with. Now, whenever we are granting an access here, we need to select the repositories. Okay, this is what something which we have to be performed with different keywords, because make sure we need to create a repository earlier. That was important. Okay, so we have to create a repository when you are going to create any kind of repositories and all that. So whatever the keywords are you going to select, we need to create the repositories before. Means whatever the code you want to develop, whatever the code you want to connect, right? So everything can be done over this. Because whenever you are making the selection process, especially whenever we want to create any kind of access and all that. So if you want to provide any kind of access to the existing application, wherein we need to go for, right? So resources which we have to be find out. If there is no resource as such, for example, if you can create a dashboard and we can access the resources, because accessing the resources is important. For that, there must be some part of code which was required. So here I have taken Bitbucket as a cloud. Now I'm just creating some workspace. Okay. So workspace is what something which I'm creating over here. Just give me a second. Because if you have the data, you can create the pipelines directly. If you have not have the data, because initially to start with, when we don't see any kind of data, something of that sort, we can have an option where we can create, right? So here, right, so bitbucket.org, new workspace is what something which I'm taking, right? So just give me a minute. Yeah, so I'm just creating a workspace, right? So for this, right? So workspace for L9 is what something which I'm taking over here, right? So yeah, so speed as is taken. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3 I'm taken. Because continuous integration as less deployment and delivery is essentially needed. Because for that reason, Azure DevOps we can connect with multiple applications. Even we can connect with the Jira software, we can connect with Bitbucket, because Bitbucket is something used for the source code management. If you want to create any kind of data type pipelines and etc., all that, so you need to connect with Bitbucket or else GitHub, because GitHub is also one of the repository wherein we have to maintain. So that Bitbucket repository can also be maintained in this regard. Either Bitbucket, right? So GitHub, all these things, right? So here you can see there is an option for create repository. If you want to create a repository, where we have an option over here, right? So create a repository. Here I'm mentioning it as Rajworks. Okay, this is what something which I have taken. Access is a private repository. Next, it is a tutorial for the beginner level. Okay, that's what something which we have taken, right? So normally, is it something git ignore and all is? Yes, it is recommended. That is what something which we have taken, right? So this is majorly, especially useful for the repositories, right? So here, the branch name we have to provide, because unless until if you have not created the branch name, so adding something which is essentially required won't be possible. So we need to always have an option where we can create the repository here. Yeah, so private repository is what something which we have created. Next, right? So whatever the options you are git ignore or something like, right? So if you want to include git ignore, use it is recommended. We can take the git ignore part and we can use it. So access levels is what something which is essentially required. At the same time, if you want to include, right? So if you want to include a name or a template or something of that sort, we can use, right? So this is majorly useful for the, especially for the people who are new to the beginner level and all everything. So we always have an option where if you want to create, we can create it. That is one thing we have. Or else if you want to import the repository here, you can see there is an option for import repository. So we need to select the old repository and we can import the repository. So for that, it's always important for us to create a Bitbucket or GitHub Cloud as separate. So where the existing code was located, for example, if we being into development, we have created our own code. Okay, so we have created our own code and all, right? So that that access we can create. That is something which we can do. Or else, as I stated already here, right? So we can create a repository name, right? So repository name as Razworks and all of that. So we can create this repository name, which is a private repository, and we can create as separate. So once we have created a repository, data will be stored over there. The code will be there. So whatever the code was there and all everything, from there onwards, normally whatever the data pipeline creations and all everything is what something which normally we do whenever we are working on the Azure DevOps environment, which is essentially required. So when we are working on the Azure environment, it's always important for us to create the repository. Is what something which we must be good with, is what something which we have to be known with. Okay. So point to be noted, when we are working on Azure DevOps, if you want to create any kind of pipelines and all, here you can see the project name here we have to provide. So I'm giving a project name called Qlient. Okay. Qlient is a project name. I'm just giving it. Okay. I'm just giving a project name itself, Rajworks, and we can create the repository. So repository creation is something needed, right? So if you are because Bitbucket repository, you can see, right? So this is where generally the Bitbucket repository we have to create. So once we have created a Bitbucket repository, so then it is easy for you to, it is easy for us to what we call creating data pipelines and all everything are more needed and more easier for us. So this is all about this video and how these pipelines to be created in depth, right? So this, because this is what we are discussing all this time. Because here, if you want to create a pipeline and all this, I'm going to explain in the next session, right? So how to build that, because two-step verification process is required for us to enable the deployments. So once it is done, how this can be, how these deployments can be done and all everything that we are going to discuss in the next session, right? So if you have any questions, please go ahead. Thank you.